Good morning, everybody, and welcome from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us for today's policy briefing, 2021 ASEAN Summit, U.S. Policy Toward Asia, featuring Ambassador David Shear, former U.S. Ambassador to Vietnam, with commentary from Dr. Nobuhiro Aizawa. My name is Shanti Shoji, Director of Programs at Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. Sasakawa USA is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization dedicated to deepening the understanding of and strengthening relations between the US and Japan for the benefit of a free and open international community. Our activities mainly focus on security and diplomacy through the engagement of exchanges, dialogue, analysis, publications, and networking. As you can see, today's event is being recorded and is on the record. A recap and video recording will be made available on Sasakawa USA's website in the coming weeks. We will have a Q&A session at the end. Please use the Q&A chat function, which you can find at the, not the chat function, but the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And you can submit questions anytime throughout the briefing. And then we will have the Q&A with both speakers at the end. And with that, I would like to pass it over to Dr. Satohiro Akimoto, Chairman and President of Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. Dozo yoroshiku onegai.
Thank you, Shanti. Good morning. I am Satohiro Akimoto, President and Chairman of Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. I am delighted to see you all. I am excited today because we are going to talk about one of my favorite parts of Asia, Southeast Asia, and our relationship with the Association of Southeast Asian Countries, the ASEAN. It is one of the most culturally rich, economically dynamic, and strategically important region for Asia. But we don't really discuss and engage the ASEAN nearly enough, perhaps because of its tremendous diversity and complexity, and also physical distance. We have the best person to do so today. I am honored to have Ambassador David Shear as a speaker today. Ambassador Scheer served for 32 years in the American Foreign Service, most recently as the US Ambassador to Vietnam. He's an Asia expert and his diplomatic post includes Sapporo, Beijing, Tokyo, and Kuala Lumpur. Following his diplomatic service, he served as Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Defense for Policy, an Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs. He is currently an adjunct professor of the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I'm delighted to have him. 3 weeks ago, we have Ambassador Masafumi Ishii, most recently Japanese ambassador to Jakarta, presenting Japan's view on ASEAN prior to the ASEAN Summit. Ambassador Scheer will present the US views on ASEAN and our relationship and the US policy toward Asia to complete the series. If I may add one thing about Dave or Ambassador Scheer, appreciate his service as chairman of the National Association of Japan-American Societies till this September. NAJAS and the Sasakawa USA jointly work on the US-Japan military program, or JUMP. I have enjoyed working with him very much, so thank you very much. I'm also honored to have Professor Nobuhiro Aizawa of Kyushu University as a commentator. Professor Aizawa is one of the most respected experts on the region in Japan. Some of you may know him from his Washington days as Wilson Center's Japan Fellow, which has been supported by Sasakawa Peace Foundation in Tokyo. He will comment following Ambassador Scheer's remarks before we go into discussion. With that, let's begin. Ambassador Scheer, floor is yours.
Thanks, Akimoto-san, and thanks to Sasakawa USA for inviting me to speak today. And it's great to see Dr. Aizawa again. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to focus today on US policy in the Indo-Pacific region, particularly in Southeast Asia, in light of the recently concluded East Asia Summit. And to do that, I'd like to start by putting President Biden's participation in the EAS into two contexts. First, the administration's diplomatic maneuvers in the region since January, and second, the place the EAS occupies in the overall autumn global diplomatic calendar. It's a very diplomatic calendar, and I think you'll find it interesting for me to run through that. Can we go to the second slide, please? The third slide, please. First, diplomatic maneuvers. The Biden administration, I think, came out of the gate determined to increase our attention to the Indo-Pacific region. The administration was determined to compete with China and to define a means of competing with China. And it was also determined to do this, to compete with China on the basis of increased cooperation with allies and like-minded partners. The administration demonstrated all this, I think, in a robust series of engagements with the region, including a set of opening presidential phone calls to his allied counterparts in Asia, including Prime Minister Suga, Australian Prime Minister Morrison, ROK President Moon, and Indian Prime Minister Modi. Only after all of these calls did the president speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping on February 10th. Next slide, please. The administration followed up those phone calls with successful visits to the region by the Vice President, by Secretary of Defense Austin, by Secretary of State Blinken, and Deputy Secretary of State Sherman. And only after Secretaries Austin and Blinken had visited the region, and only after the president had hosted the first Quad Summit, did we engage, Secretary Blinken and National Security Advisor Sullivan engage their Chinese counterparts in the now famous meeting in Alaska. Prime Minister Suga also had a very successful visit to Washington in April. The AUKUS announcement followed in September, coupled with another Quad Summit and bilateral meetings between the president and his Japanese, Australian, and Indian counterparts. There were some missteps, of course. One of them, I think, was the president's failure to call Indonesian President Jokowi or to interact with any of his Southeast Asian counterparts at first. I think that was a mistake. Another misstep was the technological glitch, which prevented Secretary Blinken from engaging with his ASEAN counterparts at the end of May. He kept them waiting for a while as they tried to figure out a communications problem, and they were never able to fix it. He made that up in August, I think. But overall, I think as I said earlier, the administration, I think, came out of the gate pretty strongly. And I was very impressed by this series of events. And by March, I was wondering how they'd follow up. They had seemed to have done so well in their messaging and their planning of this diplomatic campaign is actually what it was. Please go to slide 5, the next slide. And this fits into a very crowded autumn diplomatic schedule. The autumn is always extremely busy globally for diplomats. They spend August vacationing and thinking about what they're going to do in fall, and senior officials come back and work their diplomats very hard, trying to put the ideas they had in August into practice. And this year was no different. The East Asia Summit convened virtually on October 27, chaired by Brunei this year. It took place, again, within this very crowded schedule. It started actually in the summer, in June, when the UK hosted the G7 summit. The president also attended the NATO summit in Brussels on the same trip. Secretary Blinken met virtually with ASEAN foreign ministers during the ASEAN Regional Forum in August. That's an annual event. President Biden spoke to the UN General Assembly on September 21st. And the president is always accompanied to New York by the Secretary of State. And this year, Secretary Blinken conducted a full schedule of bilateral and multilateral engagements in New York, including with his ASEAN counterparts. It's traditional now for the Secretary of State to conduct a foreign minister level meeting with his ASEAN counterparts in New York on the margins of the UNGA. President Biden then chaired a virtual summit on climate change on September 22. The president joined the virtual US ASEAN Summit on October 26th. The East Asia Summit happened on October 27. And the next day, the president headed to Rome for the G20 summit, and then to Glasgow for the COP26. So the president has been very busy. He met, and this is not widely known publicly, but the president met bilaterally with Indonesia, finally, with the Indonesian President Jokowi on the margins of the Conference of the Parties in Glasgow. Then on October 31st, President Biden hosted a virtual global summit on supply chain resilience, on the margins of which he met with Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. Another meeting that has not been widely publicized, at least in the US, but of course, a very important meeting for the president to have with one of his Southeast Asian counterparts. And this series of autumn events is not over yet. The East Asia Summit is always annually paired with the APEC Summit. They're going to happen a little apart, 2 weeks apart, about 2 weeks apart this year, because they're both being held virtually. But the APEC Summit will convene November 11 through 13 this year, hosted by New Zealand. Experienced Asia hands will note that the president has visited Europe twice, and he hasn't visited Asia yet. And that under normal circumstances, I think might be grounds for complaint. But this year, let's face it, both the EAS and the APEC summits are being held virtually. Those are always the occasion for the president's trip to the region in the fall. And I think the president wanted to travel this year in the fall. I think the White House staff wanted him to travel this fall, but because of COVID and because of the fact of the meetings are being held virtually, the White House clearly decided that visiting the region later was the right thing to do. And my guess is that the president will visit the region probably in the first half of next year. Certainly if I were in the White House, that's what I would be urging on his schedulers. Why is it important to view the East Asia Summit in this big global diplomatic context? It's important because that's how the White House views it. The White House sees all of these events as an opportunity to highlight the president's global agenda and to highlight his highest foreign policy priorities. It's clear from all of these events that the president's highest priorities are combating COVID, recovering economically, and mitigating climate change. And the ASEANs share these priorities. So we have a real mesh of priorities this year coming together for the East Asia Summit. Next slide, please. What are the goals? What are American goals for the East Asia Summit? Well, first of all, the EAS is an annual gathering of 10 ASEAN countries plus 8 dialogue partners. And those dialogue partners are the US, Japan, the ROK, Russia, China, Australia, India, and New Zealand. The East Asia Summit was established in 2004, and it met first in December of 2005. The EAS always follows the conclusion of the annual ASEAN Summit among just the 10 ASEAN leaders, and clustered around the ASEAN Summit and the EAS are annual ASEAN +1 meetings between the 10 ASEAN members and individual dialogue partners. So the US-ASEAN Summit conducted on October 26 was one of many ASEAN +1 meetings held in conjunction with the ASEAN Summit and the EAS. And I have no doubt that the president stressed all of his goals in his interactions with ASEAN. It was also clear that the administration wanted to convey to the region its commitment to increasing our level of engagement. And of course, President Biden's interaction with the ASEANs comes after 4 years during the Trump administration, in which the president did not attend East Asia summits. He attended one APEC summit in Da Nang in November 2017. And I think that ended his participation in both the APEC and the EAS summits for the duration of his administration. So President Biden's participation in the EAS represents a comeback, a return by the United States to this important forum. And of course, as everyone who, like me, who's had the experience of senior officials going to ASEAN meetings, it's a long trip. And these meetings are lengthy, and they sometimes aren't particularly substantive in the plenary sessions, at least. But the East Asia Summit provides a critical platform for the United States to broadcast its message to the region. Participation in East Asia Summit and other ASEAN-related multilateral forum is a prerequisite for effective American bilateral interaction with ASEAN members. If you're not gung-ho in favor of ASEAN centrality, and if you're not participating in ASEAN regional forums, then it just doesn't grease the bilateral wheels of diplomacy in Southeast Asia for you. So these meetings are critically important, however difficult they may be to participate in. And this is how we convince presidents to go to Southeast Asia every year, or not, as the case may be. But it's looking to me, given the administration's priorities, like the president will make an effort to attend all of these throughout his administration. So the president clearly articulated strong American interest in addressing COVID, both in the United States, of course, and in cooperation with the ASEAN countries in ASEAN countries. The White House released a fact sheet detailing up to 102 million in new initiatives to expand the US-ASEAN strategic partnership to support the region's recovery from COVID, address the climate crisis, and promote economic growth, as well as develop human capital. This is a modest package, but it shows that we want to keep skin in the game. And it clearly dovetails with current urgent ASEAN priority on addressing COVID. And of course, this isn't all that the US has contributed to the effort. This adds to what the US has already done on COVID in the region. We've provided more than 40 million vaccine doses and more than $200 million in emergency health and humanitarian assistance. The administration also, of course, aired strong views on the situation in Burma and urged ASEAN members to strengthen their efforts with regard to the military regime in Burma. An ASEAN foreign ministers meeting that convened in October disinvited junta leader Min Aung Hlaing in favor of a non-political representative, but no one from Burma showed up online for the EAS summit. Of course, in April, ASEAN issued a 5-point consensus on dealing with the crisis in Myanmar. It took that was 2 months after the overthrow of the democratic government took place, and so ASEAN characteristically pursued a stately pace in making that decision. It took another 4 months until August for ASEAN to appoint a special envoy to Myanmar, who is a Bruneian diplomat. And he has not yet been able to visit Burma because the regime has set too stringent conditions for his visit, including not allowing him to meet with the imprisoned Aung San Suu Kyi. Can you move to the next slide, please? So in the midst of this pretty energetic regional diplomatic campaign of engagement, increased engagement, in which the administration has engaged, and in the context of this larger autumn diplomatic calendar, the US, and I think the president's campaign has been very successful, first in demonstrating that the Americans are back, that the Americans are going to engage energetically and fully in the region. And I think it's been successful in ensuring that everybody understands what our messages are, including our global messages on issues like COVID, as well as our intention to compete responsibly with China. So I think it's been a very successful opening effort by the administration. And I think we can think of the president's participation in EAS and APEC summits as a culmination of that opening diplomatic campaign. Nevertheless, there remain serious challenges to US policy in the region that the Biden administration faces. The opening diplomatic campaign leading to the Alaska meeting with the Chinese, multiple meetings with the Quad, and the AUKUS announcement, along with the president's participation in EAS, I think have established a strong base. But behind these efforts lies a lot of unfinished work, and a lot of hard decisions about strategy and resources have yet to be made by the administration. The administration's issuance of the interim national security guidelines in February, I think, was notable and welcome, but some observers argue that the White House is focusing on competition with China in more functional areas like technology and health than in geopolitical terms. I think it's too early to tell. The administration has yet to issue a full national security strategy. We expect one, I think, by the end of this year or early next year at the latest. And it hasn't issued a companion to the NSS, the National Defense Strategy, of course. As far as I know, a classified effort to formulate a China strategy remains unfinished, and we don't yet know how the administration will articulate its conclusions publicly. Nor has the administration issued its global posture review, its global military posture review, which should reveal the military dimensions of the administration's competitive strategy. So the administration faces some big challenges in competing with China and in shaping its approach to the region. With regard to specific challenges, first, I think that the US just can't achieve primacy in Southeast Asia by using the traditional tools by which we have secured our primacy. And those tools include drawing a clear line of defense between us and them, establishing strong alliances, and forward deploying superior military forces. To do that, you need elites in allied countries who feel seriously threatened by your adversary. And in this regard, our strategic posture and our strategic behavior in Southeast Asia differs considerably from that in Northeast Asia. In Northeast Asia, we have clear lines of defense. We have strong, capable, reliable allies, and we have lots of forward deployed forces stationed in our allies, ROK in Japan. That contrasts with Southeast Asia, where we don't have the line of defense has been fading for some time. We don't have reliable, strong, capable allies necessarily. And if you want to talk about the Philippines in that connection, I'd be happy to do so in the Q&A session. And we don't have a lot of forward deployed forces. After US forces left the Philippines in the early 90s, we thought that our presence in Japan could handle it all. And maybe it could through the early 2000s. But now that China has the largest Navy in the world at 355 ships, the situation has changed and we can't handle it all from Japan. We've got to have forces in Southeast Asia. We've got to have a stronger diplomatic effort in Southeast Asia. And what we have to be able to compensate in some way for our inability to establish primacy in the traditional way. We've got to devise new ways of maintaining and strengthening our presence. I think the risk of Chinese military aggression in Southeast Asia anytime soon is low. Of course, we would see Chinese military action in the region were there a Taiwan contingency as well. But I think the risk of a Taiwan contingency anytime soon is also low. The Southeast Asians just don't feel threatened the Southeast Asians just don't feel threatened by the Chinese, like the Central Europeans feel threatened by the Russians. Vietnam is not like Latvia. Southeast Asian elites welcome the chance to engage with China and the economic opportunities that engagement with China offers. And they're not going to risk deeply antagonizing China in the absence of an existential threat. It's also not clear that we'll have sufficient forces to bolster our current forward deployments in the near term. It looks like the US defense budget's going to level off at about $714 billion per year. For the foreseeable future. It also looks like the number and capability of major US naval combatants isn't going to increase overnight either, much as we'd like it to. In fact, last year's China Military Power Report revealed that China, as I said earlier, now has the world's largest Navy at between 355 and 360 ships and submarines, compared to a global US battle force of 297. That's a global level, not a regional level. So in addition to finding new ways of posturing our forces, we'll need to make the hard decisions required to maintain deterrence in a resource-constrained as well as a geopolitically constrained situation. It's geopolitically constrained because we can't make the same kind of alliances in Southeast Asia that we can keep in Northeast Asia. We won't know if the administration is willing to make these hard decisions until we see the national security strategy and its companion pieces. Hopefully, they'll reveal everything. Secondly, we still don't have a regional economic policy. In this regard, the president said something that caught my attention in his East Asia Summit remarks. The readout of the summit said that the president announced that the United States will explore with partners the development of an Indo-Pacific economic framework that will define our shared objectives around trade facilitation, standards for the digital economy and technology, supply chain resiliency, decarbonization, and clean energy, infrastructure, worker standards, and other areas of shared interest. This is certainly intriguing, but none of my trade expert friends in Washington know what the readout is talking about. It's clear that it's not talking about a free trade agreement. It's talking about arrangements in specific areas, but it's not clear exactly what the administration intends to do or how it intends to do it. I'm certainly not confident that the administration will move to rejoin TPP anytime soon, much to my distress. Third, The US needs to look closely at how we're spending foreign affairs related funding across the board to ensure that it matches stated regional priorities. For example, as far as I know, we're spending security assistance funds based on the same priorities we had at the end of the Cold War. According to a recent Center for American Progress report, over 80% of the State Department's foreign military funding goes to Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. Another large chunk goes to Iraq and Pakistan. If we're going to place geopolitical priority on the Indo-Pacific, it seems to me there should be more funding, more security assistance funds going to the Indo-Pacific region. The same goes for infrastructure development finance. The BUILD Act of 2018 boosted funding for infrastructure finance by $60 billion globally and established the Development Finance Corporation, or the DFC, to better manage our support for infrastructure projects. It's not clear, however, that these funds will be used in ways that promote our geopolitical interests in priority regions. In fact, if you go to the DFC website, they posted a press release in September that announced a $1.4 billion tranche of financing, mostly going to, as far as I can tell, Africa and Latin America. Now, of course, we're competing with the Chinese on development assistance in all of those areas, but the question is the allocation of those funds done strategically? And I think in all of these areas where we have to shift resources, it's going to take sustained presidential attention, not only to the region and to regional diplomacy, but to what the American bureaucracy is doing and what they should be doing, and ensuring that they do it. And it's early in the administration, but it's my hope that the White House turns to the task of ensuring that the bureaucracy does what's included in the White House's highest priorities. Finally, it's apparent that the U.S. government is devoting it's not apparent that the U.S. government is devoting the diplomatic resources necessary for us to pursue our goals effectively in the region. The last time I checked, we still didn't have ambassadors in 4 out of 10 ASEAN capitals or in the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta. We haven't had an ambassador in Singapore since 2017. Ambassadors and assistant secretaries are our senior most regional experts, and they are most responsible for identifying and exploiting diplomatic opportunities. Every day without an ambassador in capitals is a day of lost opportunities. And I must say it's a day of humiliation for the United States, because this is just a sign of incompetent governance. And I don't blame the Biden administration for this. I blame the Senate, actually. Finally, last slide, please. I'll wrap it up shortly. With regard to the US-Japan relationship in Southeast Asia, I think we're experiencing a renaissance of US-Japan geostrategic cooperation, not just in military-to-military cooperation. That's been a big focus, particularly in the American national security community in Washington. But we're enjoying a geostrategic cooperation with the Japanese across the board right now. And I believe that Southeast Asia is likely to emerge as one of the focuses of our bilateral efforts. Japan has deep roots, especially economic roots in Southeast Asia, and we in Washington don't always appreciate the strength of Japan's influence in the region. Japan's foreign direct investment in Southeast Asia outstrips Chinese FDI, as does the level of Japanese infrastructure financing. And we've seen on the ground the level of quality of Japanese infrastructure projects in contrast to that of the Chinese. We can see Japan's increased regional leadership in its establishment of the CPTPP after the US pulled out. And we can see Japanese leadership in the growth of their bilateral ties to Australia the Philippines, Vietnam, and India, and in the annual dispatch of maritime self-defense force vessels to the South China Sea. I believe there's a Japanese task force headed by the Kaga in the South China Sea right now. We can also see it in the development of the Quad and in Japan's strong support for AUKUS. I think we're entering another period of alliance evolution as Japan considers revising its own national security strategy. I think Prime Minister Kishida made that announcement shortly after his election as Prime Minister. I understand that it'll take about a year for the Japanese government to revise the NSS. And of course, revisions to the National Defense Program guidelines and the midterm defense plan, it seems, are also likely. Japanese press reports suggest that the government of Japan is also considering how to revise the US-Japan defense guidelines in connection with this process. So this will be a big opportunity for the US to get with our Japanese counterparts and consult together with regard to how the US-Japan alliance is going to look in the coming years based on new revised defense guidelines. There will be some big issues on the bilateral US-Japan agenda, including further missile defense cooperation, Japanese offensive strike capability, Taiwan, of course, and the next generation Japanese fighter. But I hope that in the midst of this dialogue, the US and Japan can expand our conversation, not only on military capabilities, our military capabilities and operations in Southeast Asia, but our diplomatic capabilities and operations as well. And I'll stop there. I've gone over time, and I'll turn the floor over to Dr. Aizawa.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Shear, for your concise and thoughtful remarks. America is back. The message has been delivered. In order for message to be received, now you need a receiver. And there are challenges remains, and we may need a new approach, highly nuanced approach rather than a binary choice between them or us. You also mentioned the importance of Quad, AUKUS, and the US-Japan relationship. And I think this is a great segment to invite Professor Aizawa to present his commentary. Professor Aizawa, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akimoto. And it's so nice to see you, Ambassador Scheer. Thank you so much for the Sasakawa USA for inviting me here. As always, I really thank you for your support in making my exchange with my friends in Washington, D.C. possible. I think Ambassador Scheer has made a very comprehensive and updated and critical analysis of what U.S. policies are for Southeast Asia. So I wouldn't be able to comment on all of them because there was so much on the plate. But I just picked maybe 4 points. I will be quick, but I really want to ask a lot, or I want to comment on the important issues that he has already shared with us. So first one, I think the focus on EAS and the multinational arena, I cannot agree more on how important that is. I had the privilege to talk to President Yudhoyono SBY when he wanted the EAS to be expanded and having more members, not just the ASEAN +3, but also India, Australia, and then Russia to United States. I think the whole purpose was to put ASEAN on the center, the geographically center, because he was concerned about APEC. If you look at APEC, ASEAN is on the margins, but he wanted to change that. And I think having USA agree to always embrace the design of EAS already is a very strong confidence building for United States Southeast Asia relationship. So I think that confidence really mattered, and having the Biden administration choose to be engaged with that was already a very big thing. I know there are so many skeptics about the multinational arena, because what they cannot deliver. There's so many things that they cannot deliver. But I think the really fundamental thing why Southeast Asia cherish this arena is because if you look at Southeast Asia, the strategic environment is a very asymmetrical power relationship vis-a-vis China. You really have to manage that asymmetrical relationship. The only thing you can do is either, bandwagon with the neighboring power holder, or to rely on a more multinational or international arena. If you look at the United Nations, it's very difficult for Southeast Asian country to rely on it because it's very difficult to have the P5 to get an agreement on critical issues. While at least at EAS, the big actor named US and China can at least talk there. And what Southeast Asia want is more of a strategic transparency. I think that is the key. Southeast Asia want to directly hear from both United States and China at the same time. And United States agreeing on that is already a very big confidence building. I cannot emphasize more on how strategically important it is, despite of all the critique that the multinational is already always regarded as cannot deliver. I think the foundation is there to make the stability. That's number one comment. Number two, I think I also agree on how important the economic package, and I'm also pessimistic about the TPP, like what Ambassador Scheer has said. But I don't think, I think there is a consensus, not just in Southeast Asia, but also in Japan and also in United States. The competition front is economics. So unless you have an economic policy, you can't be relevant in the region. And I think all the deliveries that US has been committed is just a whole good sign of how United States is back into the region. I think it's more of a diplomatic strategy on how to present this, because I think it is, I think United States and Japan is the same boat. I think there's so many deliveries, but it's not in the publicity is not there. Maybe the TPP was the best way. It's like a home run, or if I use the baseball analogy, it's a home run or the complete game. But I think at this domestic political environment, we have to focus a lot more on like a small ball baseball game. You have to have many hits and stolen bases, and all these small deals matters. And what I mean by this is, for example, even though the TPP was not there, the United States and Japan had a digital trade agreement. I think those kind of agreement matter. It's a much smaller scale compared to those TPP, but everybody also understands the digital front in economy is the front of all competition. And if that is the case, I think any single case, any single issue of agreement among the region is, I think, worth a very strategic and political investment. So I know TPP is difficult, but I think we need to change the mindset of the game. We have to play small on economic policy packages. That's number two. And number three, I think Ambassador Shear has given us a lot on the strategic, on the defense front. And I also agree so much on the kind of conventional way of achieving primacy over traditional security apparatus is no longer a case. I think that is also true. And one thing I noticed is that, I was listening to the, say, Indonesian new, the military chief's hearing in the parliament, and he was talking a lot about new technology, like the drone system and so forth. I think those kind of high-end technological, but not necessarily the missiles, but also more of a domain awareness type of capabilities. I think those are more in the forefront of the strategic or even the procurement menus in the region. Why? Because I think everybody understands the maritime is the security front. But I also understand that all the countries in Southeast Asia, the Navy has very little political voice. I think that's very different from the United States and Japan. The structural difficulty that we always had is that even though the Navy agrees on the strategic importance of naval security, but they don't have the political capital to win budgets, especially on procurement side. So always the budget goes to the military side, the army side, and then the procurement deals do not match strategy. But now we have more of a small scale budget, but enhanced capabilities with the new technology that we are available, that we can buy. I think those end is where United States and Japan also can work together. And one case in point, like, I'm sorry, I keep on bringing up the Indonesian case, but in last, this year, Japan had a Indonesia, Japan 2+2 meeting. And as always, there was a lot of general agreements, but one point stands out in this particular meeting, which was to focus on the Sulu and Sulawesi Sea of security. I think that is not coincident with a lot of, for example, underwater drone being found in Indonesia that were originally from China. So I think there are awareness, and I think there are awareness, especially in the Navy front. Maybe we don't hear much on the summit level because of their military structure, where Navy doesn't have the voice or have the necessary ear of the president and the prime minister. So I think we have to make sure we understand that political reality that in Southeast Asian country has, and we approach very directly with the military, with the Navy apparatus. And I think that network building might be a new way of creating a new network in the region. A final point, I think we are waiting for the national security, NSS, the full NSS report on the United States, and also the new NSS for Japan. And I think those are the key documents. And I'm particularly interested in the United States, the interim one that said, democracy can be a position of might. I think, how will we do that is going to be a very fundamental challenge for both the United States and Japan, because Prime Minister Kishida also mentioned that he wants to run the politics in times of crisis on democracy. I think both leaders has used a very similar terminology on how to pursue politics and also foreign policy. It's very much about how to put democracy in a position of might when the world has rising nationalism and receding democracy. And how do you do that? I think this also echoes to what Ambassador Scheer has talked about, an updated and also non-traditional means to achieve this. What I mean by here is, I think we all know democracy delivers, and the United States has shown that through the pandemic, crisis, which is the delivery of vaccine.
Saying that,
I think we cannot emphasize enough how much that was important to show the United States can deliver, democracy can deliver. But the problem here is, I think, those scientific capability that democracy has shown does not necessarily help democracies. Science can also can be a supporting of authoritarianism. Science can go against middle class. Science can be perceived as authoritarian. So I think that is the big puzzle I would like to argue with my friends in the United States, in Japan. I think we have shown democracy delivers. It's not only the authoritarians that deliver, democracy delivers. But what they deliver, which is, I think it is the science, the power of science does not necessarily support democracy. So how are we going to do it together? I think that will be a big challenge for us, and especially for countries like Southeast Asia too. Thank you so much.
Well, Nobu, Professor Aizawa, thank you very much for your concise and thoughtful comment. And I'd like to invite Ambassador David Shear to respond if you have any response to Professor Aizawa's comment.
Thank you, Akimoto-san, and thank you, Dr. Aizawa, for that very good presentation. I, of course, agree with you on the subject of TPP. I think it was a blunder for the United States to pull out of it. I think we need to be back in it and understand the political realities in Washington, but we can't sleepwalk our way through economic affairs in Southeast Asia or anywhere else for that matter. And I think the Chinese application for membership under normal circumstances would be a red flag waving at us. But given the political realities in Washington, it's really hard to get people to in the administration to seriously consider rejoining TPP anytime soon. And I'm not, as I mentioned in my presentation, the president outlined a set of possible arrangements with the region, but it's not at all clear what that means or what the substance of that will be. So I think the administration has a lot. I'm very sympathetic to the administration, but I think they have a lot of work to do, particularly in the economic sphere. And it'll be a while before I think before we get it right.
Thank you very much. Before I go into Q&As, I just wanted to ask Professor Aizawa a quick question. As Ambassador Scheer said, Japan has a bigger economic presence in Southeast Asia. You said that a small ball is important. Is there anything that Japan can approach United States to jointly work on the economic front in relationship with ASEAN?
I think there are a lot of there, especially on say on the resilience of the supply chain, right? I think that's where Japan had laid the foundation in Southeast Asia. I mean, Japan's Southeast Asia policy is not really government-led; it's more of a corporate-led. And what does that mean is very much a manufacturer-led. Manufacture supply chain throughout Southeast Asia. That really made the de facto connectivity within the market. So we need to kind of make sure those connectivity that is done by supply chain is going to be integrated with the United States supply chain in the region. I think we need to find the synergy there. One case, for example, is robotics, for example. We know robotics is going to be a growing market, and we know all the manufacturing is going to be into more robotics. How are we going to set the rules and the standard of robotic applications, both in manufacturing and now then to retail spaces too? And so I think there are many key growing and also founded on a Japanese network that is up for grab right now. And I think for that, I think the United States and Japan has a very common interest in hitting the small balls first. Yeah. Thank
you very much. As a former Japanese businessman working for a large company in Southeast Asia, commercially led, yes, you're right. But in order to private sector companies to lead the deal with American companies need to make economic sense, and that's a challenge. I'd like to invite Dr. Satu Limaye, President and the Director of East Western Center in Washington, to ask question.
Well, hello all, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join this program. As a participant, I really welcome always a chance to hear David Shear, Ambassador David Shear, and Dr. Aizawa for their really thoughtful and interesting comments. There's so much insight and expertise that they brought today. Just a couple of things that really struck me that I want to flag. I found very useful this putting ASEAN and our Southeast Asia policy in this global diplomatic context and the regional context. But I really think there are two variables that are the weightiest. And one is the US-China relationship, quite apart from any other summit or anything, where we're going on that. And the other is what we're going to do on COVID. Because in the near term, no trade agreement, no digital trade agreement, no meta trade agreement, no standards agreement is going to substitute for COVID and economic recovery. And unless we're part of that solution in a very visible and fundamental way, I think that's an issue. On the defense front, something that I pay some attention to, the way I've been thinking about it, we've been talking for 20 years about diffusing and diversifying our posture in Southeast Asia. And the real disconnect for me on our side is our services have a pretty clear view of what kind of posture they'd ideally like and where they'd want it. But our services is quite different from the overall enterprise of where we're going, given, Dave, which you very rightly pointed out is probably flat lines on defense in terms of real growth, real questions about what posture choices are made. I mean, do we do a standoff posture or more in region posture? So that's a second thing. My two questions are this, and Nobuo touched on this a little bit at the end. We've had a year-long engagement with Indo-Pacific, very robust in my view, very active, and finally a little late to Southeast Asia, but wonderfully engaged at Southeast Asia now. I have to say, what do you guys think Southeast Asia will want to hear or not hear from the planned, at least scheduled, announced December summit between President Xi and our President Biden? Because I think everyone in Southeast Asia is going to be watching that very carefully. And the second is another December event to culminate this year of activity. And that's the Democracy Summit. And we've seen preliminary leaks of lists of attendees for the summit by country. And I just wondered what you thought, how that would play in the region, given, let's face it, a real extraordinary number of questions about democracy, human rights, press freedoms, what have you. So those are my two questions and two comments. And again, Dr. Akimoto, thank you so much for taking my questions and comments. And thank you to Ambassador Scheer and Nobuo, from both of whom I continue to learn and gain insights. Thank you.
Dr. Limari, thank you very much. Ambassador Scheer.
Yeah, thank you for those insightful comments, Satu, as always. On the Xi-Biden summit, if there is one, I think both China and the United States will be, despite all the tension, despite our commitment to competing with China, I think both sides will be seeking ways of stabilizing the relationship. I think that will be highest on both sides' agenda. And I hope that the two sides can achieve that. And I think that's what the region and ASEAN's will be looking for reassurance that the US and China see a stable relationship, continued stable relationship, as being in their interest, because that reduces the risks in Southeast Asia. It doesn't relate to they're concerned about the possibility of war, but they're also concerned about being forced to choose on other important diplomatic issues. They don't want to be. And to the extent that the US and China can establish a more stable relationship, the risk of being caught having to choose is reduced. On the subject of the Democracy Summit, the American emphasis on democracy and human rights is nothing new. The Biden administration, of course, has re-emphasized the importance, values, the important role that values play in the pursuit of our foreign policy and defense goals. And I think it will be important for the administration to reiterate that message in conducting the Democracy Summit. I haven't seen a list of invitees or a detailed agenda for the summit, but we've had democracy summits before, and the region, particularly Southeast Asians, have been able to adjust to that and to work with it. We don't always agree. We don't always agree with the Japanese on this, and the way in which we've engaged on Burma is a case in point. But that too is nothing new, and we've managed it in the past, and we'll manage it again in the future, I think.
Thank you very much. We have several actually questions with regard to economy and democracy. So it was a good exchange that we have. I have a question from Mr. Tanaka of Kyodo News Agency. He has several questions, but one of his questions is about the AUKUS. There have been divided reactions to AUKUS among ASEAN countries. How do you see their reaction to AUKUS and what the United States can do?
Well, do you mind if I go first?
Of course, this is your session.
Individual ASEAN reaction to AUKUS was mixed. On the one hand, you had a very strong, enthusiastic response from the Philippines. Singapore gave a more lukewarm response in Prime Minister Lee's conversation with Prime Minister Morrison, in which Prime Minister Lee said he hoped that it contributed to regional stability. Indonesia and Malaysia, meanwhile, whose statements look like they coordinated them to some extent, expressed strong concern for the prospect of nuclear proliferation throughout the region. And Malaysian Foreign Minister Hishamuddin went even further beyond that to propose that he travel to Beijing to discuss it. That didn't happen, but it appears that the Malaysians went into the ASEAN Summit and the East Asia Summit trying to establish an ASEAN consensus on AUKUS. I don't think that succeeded at all. I don't think there is a consensus on AUKUS. What guides me, my thinking in all of this, is what a senior Vietnamese official once told me about American engagement in the region. I remarked, this was probably in 2014 or so, I remarked that the Chinese were out there building military facilities on the features they claim in the Spratly Islands. And I wasn't sure that we could stop them from doing that. And so what's the point of American engagement on this, I asked. And he said, when the region knows that the Americans are engaged, the Chinese treat us better. So to the extent that AUKUS and other instruments, diplomatic instruments like the Quad, further secure American engagement in the region and amplify American engagement in the region, I think ASEANs will welcome that, even if they do so quietly, because they think the Chinese will treat them better. It will give them leverage vis-a-vis the Chinese that they can use. And that's the whole point of the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, as far as I'm concerned, allowing sovereign Southeast Asian countries to choose for themselves and to give them maximum room to maneuver as they make that choice. That's the whole idea. And that's what the Quad and AUKUS do. And I think ASEAN ultimately will adapt to it, as they've adapted to great power plays in the region throughout history.
Thank you very much. Professor Aizawa, would you like to make a brief comment?
Yes, thank you very much, Akimoto-san. Yes, I totally agree with Ambassador Scheer, and I think the way they talked in like ASEAN meeting and also try to build up a consensus in ASEAN is a sign that they wanted to have a ASEAN voice on any matter. So which is a good cushion for not having one single country being exposed in the military tension between United States and China. So be it the AUKUS, be it the other like military engagement, when they are feeling that we should talk in ASEAN, I think it's a good sign and it's a good strategy going forward. And just on the Australia, it's also worth noting there's an Australian element here. It's not just the US, China, but I think Australia also has a unique position. I think all the Southeast Asian countries have a very close relationship in the civil society, but especially on Indonesia has a special, strategic sensitivity between it. So I think we need to just factor that in addition to the US-China relationship in this AUKUS deal. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, go ahead now.
Akimoto-san, if I may.
Sure, of course.
I think Australia's position is very interesting, and I think it's particularly interesting with regard to its relationship with Indonesia. My sense is Australian relations, bilateral relations with Indonesia have improved recently, including military-to-military cooperation, as well as diplomatic cooperation. And if I recall correctly, Australia and Indonesia conducted their first 2+2 among foreign and defense ministers on September 10th, about 2 weeks before the AUKUS announcement. So the Indonesian reaction to AUKUS may have been a typical reaction for an ASEAN member, or a typical reaction for Indonesia, but that reaction took place within the context of what I think are strengthening relations between Australia and Indonesia. So I'm encouraged by that.
Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to turn to Mr. Jim Schoaf, Senior Director, Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA.
Sorry, I'm on a different screen, so I'll be looking over this way. But thank you for your presentations today. Really interesting insights. And what I'd like to ask is potentially a little bit of expansion on how you see internal dynamics within ASEAN. Satu raised the COVID issue, and this has been quite a trauma that we've all gone through, but I'm curious, both in terms of kind of a post-COVID evolution, but also within ASEAN, do we see some drifting towards potential cohesion or more fracturing, kind of economically, politically? I'm curious how you see some dynamics within ASEAN, and then what that means for a US-Japan strategy for engagement with ASEAN in this environment. Some kind of broader division of labor, playing each to our own strengths and relationships in ASEAN, or perhaps a more coordinated, collaborative, integrated approach to ASEAN. But thank you for that.
Thank you. Ambassador Shear?
Yeah, I think with regard to the question of, thanks, Jim. It's a fundamental question. And with regard to the issue of ASEAN cohesion, I go at it first from the perspective of the immense diversity of Southeast Asia. It's diverse geographically, it's diverse linguistically, culturally, religiously. It's diverse in so many ways, including big differences in level of economic development. And it's only, given that, I think it's only, it's evident that it would be difficult for ASEAN to achieve the kind of institutional cohesion that the EU has. And I've never really placed a lot of faith in that kind of evolution for ASEAN. I think ASEAN is not suited to being someone's ally. It's not suited for big time balancing in a great power competition in the region. It was established, I think, fundamentally to try and bring some encourage cooperation and reassurance among a group of Southeast Asian countries that had very little in common and that had very contentious recent experiences in the early 60s, like the confrontasi between Malaysia and Indonesia. I think that's a function that ASEAN has performed very successfully, but I'm not looking for ASEAN to be an ally. I think it's important for the US and Japan, for example, or members of the Quad, to continue placing strong importance on ASEAN centrality and engaging with ASEAN as an institution. But at the same time, we need to be discriminating in the way in which we deal bilaterally with the Southeast Asians. We need to find the ones who are strongest, most capable of standing up to the Chinese if necessary, and working more closely with them. And Ambassador Ishii noted this in his own presentation 3 weeks ago. He chose the Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia, and Vietnam, and I choose the same ones, actually. But ASEAN's not going to be an alliance, and it's not, I doubt that any of those individual countries will ever be an ally other than the Philippines. And I'm not sure of the reliability of the Philippines as an ally. So as I said in my presentation to the House Foreign Affairs Committee, dealing diplomatically with the ASEANs is like eating tofu with chopsticks. If you squeeze it too hard, it breaks up. If you squeeze it too soft, it slips away. And that's just how we're going to have to deal with individual ASEAN members.
Thank you very much. Professor Aizawa, would you like to make a very quick comment?
Yes, thank you very much, Jim, for always the nice, great question. I'm just give you 2 points. One is the economic diversity and divergence. I think the COVID has very much impacted the inequality of the region. And therefore, I think the role of China is even more important, ironically. Everybody understands China's are the origin of the COVID, but because of the sheer economic impact, they cannot live without Chinese support. So if you ask me the question about post-COVID, I think there's more importance of how they engage with China. And I don't think Japan or United States in the position to deny that. That being said, I think the other sign politically that, like you question, it's not at all, Southeast Asia is going to be all converged into authoritarian regime. I don't think so. Yes, Indonesia is standing still. Philippines, Duterte said he's not going to run for vice presidency. It's a great sign to keep democracy at the region. And I'm still hopeful, like Thai civil society movement and even the Myanmar civil society, how powerful they are against a military junta. This is unprecedented. And I don't think that we can put the clock back into the 1980s and 1990s. There's a whole new generation, a young generation who has different political mindset. And I think, that force will go for, a very, very long-term, but a gradual democratic force, and which I'm hopeful of. Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, for your wonderful question. It's 10:15 and we have come to the point where we have to finish the meeting. But if I may, I just want to ask one quick question since Ambassador Scheer mentioned that. You mentioned President Biden met with President Jokowi and Lee Hsien-loong. Any insight as to the conversation? Are these say hello, nice to meet you type of thing, or any concrete sort of substance to the discussion? I also understand that Derek Scheer, Counselor of State Department, recently visited various countries in the region. I just wonder if you have any insight to it that you can share.
I think Derek's main mission was to discuss with our ASEAN partners next steps on Burma and to ensure that our message on Burma to be delivered by the president in the EAS was clear to them. So I think he was sent partly to prepare for EAS, partly to further the conversation on Burma, particularly with Thailand and the treatment of refugees and the provision of humanitarian assistance to the Burmese. With regard to the president's meetings with President Jokowi and Prime Minister Lee, I haven't seen a readout, but if I had been the president with President Jokowi, I would have made sure that he understood that Indonesia is important to me, and that I hope he said he wanted to visit, because I think Indonesia should be on any presidential itinerary to Southeast Asia. And of course, COVID and economic recovery must have been high on the agendas.
Thank you very much. And of course, that Indonesia is going to be the chair of ASEAN in 2 years, and we all have a big hope for their leadership. So I'd like to conclude today's event. Thank you very much, Ambassador Scheer and Professor Aizawa, and everybody participated in this event. I said in my opening that this is second of the two-part series, but I feel like, as I said, we need to continue to discuss and engage ASEAN. So I hope that I can invite both Ambassador Scheer and Aizawa back, and Sasakawa USA will continue to have events on the Southeast Asian countries. So thank you very much, and I really appreciate it, your participation. Bye-bye.